So dear students, I am continuing with my class on cardiac biomechanics. So in my last class I mainly discussed about the isometric relationship. How a muscle when contracts isometrically, behaves by generation of tension, and what is the pattern of that tension generation, and what are the mechanism of generation of such tension, the contribution of contractile component, contribution of series elastic component, contribution of parallel elastic component, everything somehow I described. And I also described that how the initial length, instead of I am time and again will continue to change the terminology. Say resting length, I use the term resting length. Later I use the term passive tension, resting tension or passive tension. Now, so all these things, resting tension or passive tension, and upon stimulation by an electrical stimulus, development of active tension, all these things are dependent upon a single factor, that is the resting length of the muscle. Resting length or initial length of the muscle. And I am continuously changing the initial length and thereby verifying or detecting the effect of this changing initial length on passive tension development and on active tension development upon stimulation. And I also described that how the active length tension relationship curve is mainly operating in the ascending limb. Up to this much I described. Now today I shall start with something else or a next part of it. So we have discussed about the isometric contraction. Now let us discuss something about the isotonic contraction. So what is isotonic contraction? If I play the role, what is isotonic contraction? That means when the load is trivial or when the load is not that heavy, when the load is of such amount that by powerful contraction of muscle, it can be shortened, it can pull the skeleton and it can elevate the load, and that is isotonic contraction. Now the point is, a very important point, if we try to record the isotonic contraction. Suppose I like to record the isotonic contraction. I have shown you how to record the isometric contraction by keeping the two ends of the muscle fixed. Now let us record the isotonic contraction. To record the isotonic contraction, suppose this is the arrangement. So this is a muscle strip and this is a fixed stand on which this end of the muscle or origin end of the muscle is fixed. So origin of end of the muscle is fixed on a fixed stand and the insertion end of the muscle is kept free. Insertion end of the muscle is kept free. It is kept free and it is attached with a stylus. So it is attached with a stylus. So insertion end of the muscle is kept free and it is attached with a stylus and it is a kind of a lever. And this is the fulcrum, and if the muscle contracts, that will pull the lever, and as a result of that, this lever or this limb of the lever will move. So this is the arrangement. So this is the arrangement of recording the isotonic contraction. Isotonic contraction means where load is overcome, and as a result of that the muscle gets shortened, and we can record the extent of that shortening. So this is the situation. Now in that situation, if we stimulate the muscle, suppose we stimulate the muscle. If the muscle is stimulated, muscle will contract, and when the muscle will contract, it will pull and the load will be, so it will pull the load, so muscle will be shortened, so when the muscle is shortened, it will pull the load, and this is the fulcrum, and this will move up. So stellate will move up, and this degree of movement can be recorded. So if I attach this lever with a moving drum, suppose the drum is moving slowly. So if this fulcrum is attached with a moving drum, and if in this lever there are some writing arrangement, and the drum is moving, we can record just like that. We can record the movement of the, so this will move and this will fall down. So, and as the drum is moving, we can record a curve like that. So the lever will move up and will fall down, and as the drum is moving and it is touching the drum and there is a recording device, it will record like that. So this is a curve exhibiting a contraction. So if this is the baseline, so this is the curve which will exhibit, which will record, which is an evidence of isotonic kind of contraction. Evidence of isotonic kind of contraction. If we draw a line from the maximum amplitude, so this will be the contractile part. This is due to contraction and this is due to relaxation. So muscle will contract and will relax. So as it will contract, it will pull the lever. So lever will be elevated. So that will lead to a recording, and when it will relax, the lever will fall down, and again it will record. This will be the recording as the drum is moving. So in that way you can record that. Now on recording that, so this is a recording of the isotonic contraction. Now I like to make one very important point here. If we make one very important point here, that although we are calling it a isotonic contraction, that means a muscle strip upon application of a stimulus due to a small load can overcome the load, and thereby it is shortened and some work is being done, and that is isotonic contraction. But whatever small load it may be, suppose this is contracting and this is the load, whatever small load may be, it has got a finite value of load. It has got a finite amount of load. It may be small, but some amount of load is there. So a contractile component, when it is contracting, formation of cross bridge, sliding filament, thereby generation of force, that force will act on this load, and the force will be gradually build up. There will be gradual and progressive building up of force, and when the force is enough to overcome the load, then and then only the load is overcome. I repeat, so when the muscle is contracting, due to contraction of the contractile component, due to formation of cross bridge, due to sliding filament, due to shortening of sarcomere, all these things will lead to generation of force, and that force will progressively and gradually build up, and when the force is adequate enough to pull the load, then and then only the load will be pulled. So basically, at the initiation of every isotonic contraction, there is a small amount of isometric contraction, during which the building up of force is gradually trying to overcome the load. So even for a very small load, there may be an infinitesimal duration of isometric contraction. So in the initial part of every isotonic contraction, there is a portion of isometric contraction. So that we need to understand very carefully. So whenever some isotonic contraction is being executed at the initial part, which we cannot see, visualize or detect by our naked eye, there must be some amount of isometric contraction which is required to progressive building up of the force which is needed to overcome even this load. So with this description in the background, let us try to draw the situation. If we draw this situation, let us try to draw the situation here where we shall try to understand the length and tension. That means shortening means isotonic contraction, and increased tension means isometric contraction, and their relationship in a single frame of reference. So let us do that. So if we draw like that, so this is the time, this is the so suppose there are two scale, this is one scale and this is another scale. Suppose this is tension, right? And here we are showing the shortening. So there are two scales. One is shortening and another is tension. Now suppose stimulus is applied. Just try to think about that muscle which I have drawn just now. Stimulus is applied, and when stimulus is applied, initial part is isometric contraction. So there is an initial isometric contraction. So what will happen in the initial part of the isometric contraction? There is a gradual build up of tension. Initial part of isometric contraction, there is gradual build up of tension. Whereas during that time there is no shortening. So there is a gradual build up of tension. That initial isometric contraction, there is a gradual build up of tension during which there is no shortening, because this duration is of isometric contraction. Now when the tension is adequate enough, leading to enough amount of force generation, then the load will be overcome, and once that load will be overcome, there will be shortening. The lever will be pulled, there will be shortening, but at that time the tension becomes unchanged. So tension becomes plateau. So this is a very, very important diagram. This is happening in the একটু ঠিক করে দিই। So this is at the same point of time. So this is a classical picture of what is happening in isotonic contraction with respect to intramuscular tension and shortening. So at the initial part of any isotonic contraction, that I want to impress upon you, at the initial part of any isotonic contraction, a small duration of isometric contraction is there, during which the force is gradually built up in order to overcome the load. And once the load is overcome, it becomes isotonic, so that no change in tension, but at the same time there is shortening. But before that, there is no shortening because this is isometric. So this portion is isometric, generation of tension with no shortening, and this part is classical isotonic where tension remains same but there is shortening. So if you understand this thing, so we describe three things. One is a pure isometric contraction. So isometric contraction, whenever we see, it is a pure isometric contraction. If the load is too much, throughout it is isometric contraction. But there is nothing called a pure isotonic contraction, because during the initial part of every isotonic contraction, there is a small amount of isometric contraction. So this is a very important information I shared with you for our future description. So to understand further the isotonic contraction and its effect on heart, I will next take up another issue. So when the muscle is contracting, shortening, so there is displacement. So now here we can calculate the velocity. So if we get a curve like this, if we get a curve like this, by calculating the slopes, we can calculate the velocity. Rate of change of displacement, we can calculate the velocity. So for isotonic contraction, what is the parameter of contraction? It is the velocity of shortening for isotonic contraction. And for isometric contraction, it is the tension which is developed. So to characterize an isometric contraction, we use the parameter tension. Whereas to characterize the isotonic contraction, the appropriate parameter is the velocity of shortening or velocity of contraction. Now, with this background in mind, let us try to understand a few classical factors which regulate the cardiac performance or cardiac mechanical performance. So today we shall mainly discuss the various important factors which regulate the mechanical performance of heart or mechanical performance of ventricle. What are they? So let us take up one by one. When we discussed about the isometric contraction and resting length tension relationship curve, we described a curve like that. We described a curve. So that was the curve we described. Here it was EDVV, here it was SV, and we have drawn the curve like that. That was the curve. I have here specifically drawn the active ascending limb of the active curve, active tension curve, ascending limb of the active tension curve. Now this curve is specifically known as ventricular function curve or ventricular systolic function curve. I actually ended my last class by saying that. So this is a ventricular systolic function curve. Now let us try to understand what is the implication of this curve. So as EDVV is changing, stroke volume is changing, and this ascending portion of this length tension relationship curve, which is extrapolated like this, is almost linear, isn't it? Not strictly linear, but it is almost linear. So we can say that within the ascending limb, as long as it is within the ascending limb, EDVV and SV are directly proportional. Or EdVV being an independent variable determines the stroke volume as a directly proportional factor, as a directly proportional determinant. So if this is in the x-axis, so this is the independent variable, this is in y-axis, this is the dependent variable. So this EdVV is determining SV and it is almost linear or directly proportional. And this must be understood by you because I have discussed in very detail. Now, truly speaking, what I have spelled just now is nothing but articulation of a very famous law with respect to cardiovascular system is known as Starling's law. So this is a very famous law of heart known as Starling's law of heart or Frank Starling's law of heart. Is a very famous law of heart. What is the law? As it is said as law, so there must be a statement. The statement runs like this. The very statement of Starling's law of heart runs like this, that the energy of contraction is directly proportional to the resting length of the cardiac muscle fiber within physiological limit. Please note it down. Or in other words, we can say like that, within physiological limit, the energy of contraction of cardiac muscle fiber is directly proportional to the resting length of the cardiac muscle fiber. I repeat, within physiological limit, the energy of contraction of cardiac muscle fiber is directly proportional to the resting length of the cardiac muscle fiber. And that is precisely represented by this curve. So what is energy of contraction? The strength of contraction by which it is contracting. And what is the outcome? Outcome is stroke volume. And what is representing here the resting length of the cardiac muscle fiber? That is EdVV. So EdVV is representing the resting length of the ventricular muscle fiber and SV is the direct result of the energy of contraction and they are directly proportional. And what is within physiological limit? That is within the ascending limit. So within ascending limit. So this is a systolic function curve which is determining the amount of stroke volume based upon the amount of end diastolic ventricular volume. Or in other words, we can say the stroke volume is directly determined by the amount of venous return, because end diastolic ventricular volume is based upon or dependent on the venous return. The blood which is returning from the lower limb, then finally by inferior vena cava, from the upper part of the body, from the superior vena cava, ultimately entering into the right atrium to the right ventricle, right? Or the pulmonary blood returning via left atrium to the left ventricle. So this end diastolic ventricular volume is determining the initial fiber length of the ventricular muscle fiber, which is directly determining the energy of contraction, leading to particular volume of stroke volume, particular amount of stroke volume. And this is known as ventricular systolic function curve. Now, if we understand this, then let us try to see the implication or significance of this curve and why it is said that within physiological limit. So within physiological limit means within ascending limit. Now suppose in a particular situation, say end diastolic ventricular volume, say 130 ml. Suppose 130 ml is the end diastolic ventricular volume. And what will be the stroke volume? That will be the stroke volume. Say it is around 70 ml. My drawing is not good, scaling pattern is not good, but whatever. So a particular end diastolic volume will determine the particular stroke volume. Suppose due to any reason whatsoever, the end diastolic ventricular volume is reduced to 100 ml. So what will be the stroke volume? That will be the stroke volume. So stroke volume will be reduced from 70 to say 50 ml. Or due to any reason whatsoever, the end diastolic ventricular volume is increased from 130 to 150 ml. So what will happen? The stroke volume will increase, say from 70 to 90 ml. So this is a direct linear, almost linear relationship where as the end diastolic ventricular volume is increasing or decreasing, the respective stroke volume is increasing or decreasing. But how long it will go on? As long as it is remaining in a direct relationship in the ascending limb. Suppose the end diastolic ventricular volume is increasing further and further. Now if the end diastolic ventricular volume becomes 180 ml, if the end diastolic ventricular volume becomes 180 ml, what will happen? It will no longer operate on the ascending limb. Now it will operate on the plateau level. So if it operates in the plateau level, the stroke volume will not increase. Suppose it is now the end diastolic ventricular volume become 200 ml. If it is become 200 ml, so now it will act on the descending limb. Now the stroke volume will fall. See what is the issue? As long as it is within the ascending limb, that is physiological limit. Within physiological limit, increase and decrease in end diastolic volume will lead to respective increase and decrease of the stroke volume. But if it is operating in the plateau or in the descending limb, what will happen? Stroke volume either will not increase or stroke volume will decrease. And that will be a dangerous thing. How? Because if the stroke volume decreases, the extra amount of blood which is collected within the ventricle will not go out, will not be evacuated, will not be ejected, or it will not be emptied. So that will remain there and it will be added upon by the next venous return, next amount of end diastolic ventricular volume. So once it is operating in the plateau, once this ventricular systolic function curve is operating in the plateau, that will lead to progressive accumulation of blood within the ventricle, and with each beat, with each subsequent cycle, the relationship will move from plateau to further plateau to descending limb. And what will happen? The blood will remain accumulated, but it cannot pump out. And that is precisely what is known as heart failure. And once it is operating in the plateau, in no time, within a few beats, it will start operating in the descending limb and the person will succumb. So this is such an important thing. So that is called Starling's law of heart. How it is physiological limit? Because as long as it is acting within the ascending limb. And how it is kept within the ascending limb? That is the question you asked me in my last class. So in cardiac muscle fiber, these ventricular performance relation must be mandatorily, compulsorily kept within the ascending limb. Otherwise, if it is operating on the plateau or in the descending limb, it is just catastrophic. It will lead to a devastation, because every time some extra volume of blood gets accumulated and it will then operate in the next portion, and as it is going down, the stroke volume will dangerously lowered, and that is what is known as heart failure. So this is the importance of keeping the relationship or mode of operation within the ascending limb. And how it is done, I have described. This is due to the peculiar and particular property of the passive tension curve. So in passive tension curve, in passive tension curve of the, if you remember the passive tension curve of cardiac muscle fiber, it is ascending much earlier, thereby developing substantial amount of resting tension so that cardiac muscles cannot be stretched, overstretched, and even by the end-diastolic ventricular volume, filling will also be restricted, because once there is a huge amount of filling, there will be stretching, and once there is stretching, the passive tension curve will not allow that kind of stretching or that degree of stretching. So this is one way. This is the importance of Starling's law and understanding of the Starling's law. So if the Starling's law, so as per Starling's law, so if we rewrite again, so this is the Starling curve or ventricular systolic function curve, and as per Starling's law, within physiological limit, the energy of contraction is directly proportional to the resting length of the cardiac muscle fiber, and it is probably understood by this time. And what is the importance of operating within the ascending limb, that I have adequately explained to you. Now next another another issue. So this EDVB, so what is EDVB? EDVB is the end-diastolic ventricular volume. What is end-diastolic ventricular volume? End-diastolic ventricular volume is a result of the venous filling or ventricular filling or venous return, and as a result of venous return, it is stretched. The heart muscles are stretched, ventricular muscles are stretched. So this EDVB is as if you think about my experiment of the earlier class, where I was showing you a sliding bar which was pulling the muscle strip and thereby increasing the resting length of the muscle strip. Can you remember? So in our earlier experiment, we were using a sliding bar which was pulling. Now this pulling is acting as a stretching force, and that stretching force during resting state of the muscle, during the passive state of the muscle. So application of a stretching force during the passive state of the muscle, during the resting state of the muscle, will lead to increase in the resting length. Here EDVB is doing just that. Here EDVB, end-diastolic ventricular volume, is doing just that. It is acting as a stretching force during resting state, as a result of which the length of the individual ventricular muscle fiber is stretched. Now this is again a kind of load, isn't it? I am applying a load to stretch the muscle fiber. I am applying a load to pull out the muscle fiber. This kind of load, which we are applying, say in experimental situation by that sliding bar, or in vivo means whole body, in vivo by this end-diastolic ventricular volume, is a kind of load which is being applied on the muscle when it is in a state of rest. And this kind of load is known as preload. So this kind of load is known as preload. Preload is that load which is applied on the muscle in the state of rest before contraction. So this is the load which is applied on the muscle before contraction. This is known as preload, and preload is synonymous here in the whole body. Preload is synonymous with the end diastolic ventricular volume. Preload leads to change in the resting length of the muscle. Preload will lead to change in the L0. So as L0 is changing, it is due to the application of progressively increasing preload. So earlier we used to show all this in actual experimental situation using amphibian model, either a frog skeletal muscle or frog heart, and we used to demonstrate that, and the students used to do those experiments. But nowadays it is not possible, and also these experiments are also not usually done nowadays. So there is a lot of problem in understanding all this. Somehow I am trying my best to make you understand. So this is preload. So what is preload in intact body? It is the end diastolic ventricular volume. It is synonymous with the preload. So whenever we say that preload has increased, we mean to say that end diastolic ventricular volume has increased. So this is about preload. And what is this load? When the muscle is contracting, it has to overcome a load. That load, that means a load which a muscle is assigned to overcome. A particular amount of load which a muscle is assigned to overcome, or is expected to overcome, or is asked to overcome, is a load. That load is known as afterload. So one is preload. So what is the effect of preload? Effect of preload is stretching of the muscle. And what is the afterload? Afterload is that load which the muscle is trying to overcome. What is the effect of afterload? Effect of afterload is to resist the contraction of the muscle. Resist the muscular contraction. So preload, it is seen that preload as the preload is increasing, the performance is increasing, performance of the muscle is increasing, obviously within physiological limit. How it is so, we shall discuss. So as the preload is increasing, the performance of the muscle is increasing, obviously within physiological limit. And how, what is the mechanism of this, we shall soon discuss. And what is the effect of afterload, that also we shall discuss. So first, let us discuss the mechanism of preload determined enhancement of muscular performance. So obviously within the physiological limit. So how preload is enhancing the muscular performance? First, let us try to understand that. Now to understand that effect of preload on muscular performance, you need to recapitulate. The mechanism of muscle contraction. How the muscle filaments or myofilaments are organized, and how the myofilaments interact with each other, and how that interacting myofilaments behave at the time of muscle contraction, how they slide in within each other. These filaments are sliding in with each other and thereby leading to shortening of the sarcomere. So এইগুলো তোমাদের লাগবে. So these are the very important things which we need to recapitulate, and I will do it just in 2 to 3 minutes time, because I don't have much time. It has already been taught in detail in earlier classes. Now if we just try to recapitulate, কখন শুরু করছি? সাড়ে ছটা শুরু করছি। Now if we try to recapitulate So if we try to recapitulate the whole thing, whole lot of the muscle contraction. I can draw like that. I can draw like that. So this is so this is thin filament and this is thick filament. Thin filament is mainly actin and thick filament is mainly myosin. Now what is thick filament? Thick filament is nothing but a polymerization of myosin. Polymerization of myosin molecule. Now let us see how the myosin molecules are looking like. An individual myosin molecule are looking like this. An individual myosin molecule are looking like this. It has got a myosin head, has got a neck, has got a hinge, body and tail. So it has got a head, neck or hinge, then body and tail. So myosin is looking like that. Now this head and this kind of myosin, so this kind of myosin, they polymerize with each other in a particular spatial orientation and thereby forming a thick filament. And how they are oriented? Each of these myosin. So this is the orientation of the myosin. So if this is thick filament, how the myosins are oriented? Myosins are oriented like this. So this is how myosins are oriented. So this is the orientation of the myosins. So individual myosin molecules, they polymerize in a particular fashion and thereby forming the thick filament. And what happens in the thin filament or in the actin? In the actin, there are active sites of actin. There are active sites of actin, like this. So there are active sites of actin like this. So these active sites of actins are those sites where the myosin heads are attached. So when myosin heads are attached with the active sites of actin, they will form, suppose this is the thin filament and this is the myosin head, they attach with each other and thereby it forms a cross breach. So this is the orientation. So this is the, in the thick filament there are protruding myosin heads. Why? Because individual myosin is looking like this, and when they polymerize to form the thick filament, this is the orientation. How they form. It is in a three-dimensional manner. There are some degree of rotation. Each of the head are not in the same space. They also rotated with a specific thing. If you are interested, more detail of thick filament anatomy can be discussed. So this is how in two-dimensional picture this is looking like this. Now, if you see it carefully, you will observe two very important features. What are they? First of all, there is certain absence of myosin head in the median and paramedian area of the thick filament. There is some absence of myosin head in this portion. See, there are absence of myosin head in the median and paramedian portion of the thick filament. There is no protruding myosin head here. Number one. Number two, in ordinary state, the thin filaments are overlapping into each other And see, there are plenty of active sites of actin which remain otherwise unutilized. That means if this myosin head is bind, it binds with this one, another one bind with this one, but these active sites of actins, these active sites of actins remain unutilized, isn't it? These active sites of actin remain unutilized. So this is a phenomenon. So in resting state, in a purely resting state, what is happening? The actinomyosin organization pattern, actinomyosin orientation pattern is such. Good amount of active sites of actin remain unutilized. I have got fantastic pictures in my disposal. I will try to show them in a PowerPoint presentation in some later date. Then you will understand in a better way. So, some active sites of actin remain unutilized and there is no available myosin head for them. No available myosin head for them. So this is the sarcomere, this is one Z line, this is another Z line. So these are the Z line to Z line is the sarcomere. And from here there is another one, another sarcomere. Now in this situation, if the muscle is stretched, what will happen? When the muscle is stretched, there will be optimization of probability of increasing probability of actinomyosin interaction. So as the muscles are stretched, so they will be pulled apart, two Z lines will be pulled apart, so more and more active sites of actin will have a greater potentiality to come in proximity of this myosin head, and which when stimulated, so we are stretching it and then stimulating it, we are stretching it and then again stimulating it, we are stretching it, then again stimulating it. As we are doing so, more and more we are increasing the length, there will be more and more, better and better, or what I should say, a favorable optimization of probability of actinomyosin interaction. হ্যাঁ ক্লাসে রয়েছি, আমি ক্লাসে রয়েছি, পরে কথা বলছি। So as we are pulling them, there will be greater and favorable optimization and there will be increasing possibility or potentiality of these active sites of actin to be utilized by the myosin heads, otherwise they remain unutilized. But how long and how far? So as this is going on, if we make it easy or make a simple diagram instead of such a complex diagram. So suppose now as we are moving more and more active sites of actin are interacting with it, but finally a point of time will come. Suppose in this situation, large part is going. So this will happen. So as it is moving more and more, there will be more and more increasing optimization. But after some time there will be plateau. And beyond that, they will gradually fall, and a point of time will come when it is so much separated, there will be no interaction. So if you understand that, side by side, if I draw that diagram which I have already taught, L0 tension, if we draw that diagram, the active sides of this diagram, so this active AT curve. So this AT curve is like this. So during the ascending limb, as we are increasing more and more, a greater and better optimization, favorable optimization, more and more tension generation, force generation. A point of time will come when it becomes plateau, and as it is gradually moving out, it will be going down, and when it is like this, it will become zero. So this phenomena, this mechanism is known as mutual overlapping theory. So mutual overlapping of thin filament and thick filament. Mutual overlapping of the thin filament and thick filament, or optimal overlapping of thin filament and thick filament, that will determine, with the changing resting length of the muscle, that will determine the pattern of active tension when a stimulus is being applied. So in this various points when stimulus are applied, that will lead to optimum interaction. So initially during the ascending limb, what will happen? Throughout this there will be optimum interaction, better interaction. But in the plateau, it is become saturated, that means it is no longer increasing, and beyond that, as you are further stretching it out, the thin filament is moving away from the thick filament. And ultimately, even after powerful stimulation, there will not be any tension generation. And soon the muscle will also tear or will be given out. So this is one of the mechanisms. This is one of the mechanisms behind this Starling's law. Starling's law is only stating up to the Starling's law domain ta kototuku. What is the domain of Starling's law? Within the ascending limb only. Within physiological limit. That is Starling's law. But if we try to discuss whole of the mechanism of this peculiar behavior of active tension curve, we need to understand this. In standard textbook, very good pictures are there. You consult those pictures, and I will also try to show you those pictures by appropriate PowerPoint presentation. I will try to do that in subsequent lectures. But this is the thing. So this is how the preload. So this is the cause of preload. This is a mechanism of preload. So what is preload? Preload is end-diastolic ventricular volume. What is end-diastolic ventricular volume? It is accumulated blood due to venous return. How it is doing so? It is acting as a preload. What is preload? Which is the stretching force on the muscle before the contraction of muscle. And how it acts? As it is stretching the muscle beforehand, it is causing optimization of the actinomycin interaction. And if the end-diastolic volume and thereby preload is too much, going beyond the physiological limit, then it will no further increase the tension, no further increase the stroke volume, then it will become a catastrophe. So this is somehow a very minimum, that is a simplified explanation of the preload, simplified explanation of this portion of the Starling's law and how end-diastolic ventricular volume and stroke volumes are related. So this is about the preload. And finally, I will just mention something about the afterload. So it is a bit difficult to understand the preload, but it is very easy to understand the afterload. So what is afterload? Afterload is that load which is resisting the muscle contraction. How to express the afterload? As it is resisting the muscle contraction, So it is expressed in terms of velocity. So I have shown you the length tension curve for preload, and for after load I will show you the load velocity diagram. So one is load means after load, another is velocity. So how load is determining the velocity, and it is obviously it is inverse. Not exactly linear, a bit non-linear. So this is known as a load velocity diagram. Here load means after load. So as the after loads are increasing, if after load increases, the velocity of shortening decreases. As the after load are increasing, velocity of shortening is decreasing. This is the thing. So this is the relationship between after load and ventricular performance. Here ventricular performance is expressed as the velocity of contraction, velocity of shortening of ventricular muscle fiber, and they are inversely related, not exactly linear, rather non-linear, rather a bit non-linear. So this is the two very important determinant of ventricular performance I described today. One is preload, another is after load. Now your assignment would be, so what is preload? So preload I have described adequately, and what is the preload in whole body, that is the end diastolic ventricular volume, I have described. Your aim will be, your job will be to understand after load and tell me what is after load, what is the significance of after load, or which parameter in our whole body in heart is representing after load. That will think, read and write in my group that what is after load in our whole body. I have described about preload, I also explained preload, and what is the representation of preload, that is end diastolic ventricular volume. My question is, afterload is understandable, this is afterload, but in heart, which factor is acting as an afterload against the powerful contraction of ventricular muscle? So this is all for today. Write your questions, post in the group. I will definitely answer all of them. If I cannot arrange a live real-time interactive class, I will definitely give you a recorded video lecture on all your questions. There will be no doubt about it. Thank you and good night.